Well, welcome back to another session of Me Podcasts. Just me. Today we're joined by an extraordinarily brilliant man, and I mean that. If you ever get to read a lot about what is written about him, he's just quite remarkable. And I know she's just said that he's very much an introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert, and does suffer from imposter syndrome. But he is an amazing man. This is Gary Millar. Gary, welcome.
Sid, thank you so much for that lovely welcome. Yes, I do suffer from some of those issues, and I never think that I'm a great man. I'm just a man who believes in people are good, people can be good, and we can all make wonderful things happen together. So actually, in my life, it's always about me recognizing team effort. And that's really quite important to me. I don't want to be put on a pedestal. I want actually to congratulate all those individuals who actually help me do what I do.
How lovely. So Gary, tell us, I mean, you've an amazing career, you've got amazing upbringing. So what is it that you would describe yourself as now?
Well, my mantra is to pay it forward. So I believe massively in we, as I've just said before, can all do good. I really passionately believe that through very little effort, we can make people smile, we
Oh.
can make people feel welcomed, we can make people feel good about themselves. And that sometimes is more about not what we're doing at the moment. That's you and I, Sid.
Mm.
And that is talking. I actually show, and we must show respect to people to listen more. Because when we listen, including listening to the silences
Yes.
that are coming from individuals, you can quite intuitively gain a better understanding of who they are, what they want, what they're trying to do. So I very much believe in making a difference. And that may sound to some cynically a
Mm.
cliche. It isn't. I genuinely believe I and you, Sid, and many others are put on this earth not just for self, but for others. And if we've got a podium, if we've got a stage, if we've got a podcast that we can help people feel better about what's around them and about themselves, then job is done. And that's so my answer isn't exactly what you were
Mm.
probably expecting, but my answer is Gary Millar is a pay it forward champion. I would say evangelical about paying it forward and about genuinely wanting to make a difference, as long as it doesn't harm anyone. And in fact, it must, at the back of all of that, help them and others. So I'm probably, if you were to sum it up as a psychologist, I'm a pleaser. I'm somebody who wants to please people, and I want people to please others just by being good. So I
Brilliant.
don't know if that helps in any way, but that's kind of summing part of me up. And I am a believer in the right brain, left brain principles
Mm.
about creativity, the arts, performance, culture, enjoyment, smiling, etc. on the right hand side of our brain. But I'm also a believer in practical things, in following through and delivering things. And sometimes
Brilliant.
you can't bluster your way through that. You can't talk your way through that. You've got to strategically plan ahead. So I've got an unusual outlook in life, whereas my real first career was as a computer programmer.
Wow.
But then I went on to kind of designing things, helping design rooms and hotels and bars and such, and actually writing coding that does our accounts and our payroll, and delivery systems for factories and such. So I'm a coder and a creator. And actually, a coder is a creator.
Mm.
You're using what comes from your head, your passion, and the things that you see that others might not see as quickly as you, and then adapting it and applying myself to delivering projects. So, as I say, left brain, right brain, individual. And if you're wondering who left brain individuals generally are, they would be on the accountancy legal side of careers and the creative side, which can be that too, but actually is generally our actors, our public speakers,
Mhm.
our painters, and so on. Um, and sometimes they do mix, and they mix very well. But it's quite unusual to see them mix. But when they do, magic can happen.
Oh, that's so lovely. So Gary, take us back to your kind of childhood. How did life start for you, and how did you end up where you are today?
Well, I was born in a place called Leith, in the shadow of the Hibernian football
Mm,
ground, and I'm not a Hibs supporter. That was off Easter Road, and that's not too far from Princes Street and from Leith Walk in
mm,
Edinburgh,
mm,
and lived there in what you would today call a slum, where we shared with other tenants in the building. So that's where I was born, where I was brought up. I shared a room with my granddad and my brother Norman, and my mum and dad slept behind a curtain in an alcove in the kitchen stroke living room.
wow,
So it was really a two roomed apartment, and it wasn't fit for purpose, and it was
wow.
cold. That's where we lived for the first 4 years of my life. And then the Edinburgh Corporation, the council, took pity on us and took us from that because they were going to demolish it
Mm,
and to a place called Birdie House. And we lived next to farmlands. And we had a huge meadow in front of where we lived in a prefab house, a house that was built after the Second World War. In 1947, it was built. And we moved in, and this prefab had 3 bedrooms. It had a downstairs toilet, and an upstairs bathroom,
wow.
and it was luxury, and it was like we were living in the country,
Mm,
even though it was Edinburgh, and it was beautiful. And we lived there only for 2 years. And I remember that's where I went skipping down the hill, hand in hand
oh,
with my mother, to my
oh,
first primary school, to Birdie House Primary School. So we stayed there. I went to Birdie House Primary, and then I went to Gracemount. We moved. And actually, I now know why, but at the time I didn't know why. And it will become clear now. So I had an adenoid problem in my nose. I had to have an operation to remove my adenoids. I woke up from the operation, from the general anesthetic, and I was presented with this bundle of rags. And for the first time, I met my youngest brother, Leslie, and he was
oh,
being presented to me by a nurse. And my mother walked in, and she had a anger fit because she didn't want the nurses to present this bundle of a baby to me in its shawl, because that baby had been born, and this is surprising, 3 years previously, and they had assumed he was going to die, and he was kept in hospital for that 3 years. And it's the first time I
wow,
knew he existed, and he had been born with no ears, paralyzed face,
wow,
tunnel vision, and other issues. And
wow.
he was wearing a little baby crash helmet to protect his
Oh, bless
skull
him.
because he thought if he'd fallen, he would die.
Gosh,
And my mum had been told it was her fault by my dad,
wow.
friends, by family, by the doctors. Have you been smoking? Have you been drinking? Have you been doing things you haven't shouldn't be doing? None of the above was true,
Mm,
and it wasn't her fault. But he actually grew up to have a reasonable life. He was in and out of care for all of his life, and in the most of that time he was in
wow,
care, and he couldn't speak, couldn't hear, profoundly deaf. He didn't have the mechanisms in his head, including in the inner ear, the middle ear, etc. So he would never hear, and therefore he also could not speak.
wow,
And he would grunt, he would giggle. He giggled a lot. He was adorable, friendly, bright, except at school, he
wow,
was told, and we were told, he had the mental capacity of a 9-year-old. So at 16, when he left, they did a final capacity, uh, in kind of
Wow.
analysis, diagnostic, and said, "Oh no, no." The actual word was used. He's retarded. He wasn't. He was
Mm.
16, and life was ahead of him. But he didn't do sign language. He wasn't taught that at school. They didn't teach sign language then.
Wow.
They taught oralism, which is lip reading and
Wow.
vibration. And that is coming to the conclusion of my childhood, because my mother was suffering, because he was suffering. I and my middle brother Norman were in and out of care
Wow.
until the age of 11 years old. And it wasn't nice. It was exploitation, it was bullying, it was hand me down, smelly clothes,
Mm.
not very bright, not eating enough, malnutrition, sad in even those days,
Mm.
malnutrition, and a whole batch of issues. And then we found out Leslie was thalidomide. Then my mum and dad were giving a small amount of money, less than £5,000 as compensation. So just picture this, for a lifetime of ruin from state prescribed pharmaceuticals, the thalidomide drug, and then on to Mogadon and Valium. They got
Wow.
£5,000 for that. And from that, they moved out of a corporation house or a council house, and they bought their first flat in a place called Gorgie. And I was 11, coming on to 12, and I didn't want to go to my secondary school being picked on, bullied, pointed at for wearing, for example, hand me down clothes.
Wow.
So I got myself a paper round and I loved it. And then I walked into a supermarket, a large grocery store called Benson's Supermarket. And I did that until I was 18.
Hmm.
It was like child labor, but I got paid money and I was really quite pleased. In fact, I was over the moon to be doing a paper round, working in a supermarket, because what it actually did is it gave me enough money to buy my own shirts and ties, my
Wow.
jackets, my clothes,
Mm.
because mum was back in hospital again. Leslie was still then in a boarding school in care.
Mm.
Uh, so it was myself, my dad, and my brother Norman. But dad liked his drink, liked his fists, so actually would never normally cook for us. So using the money that I wasn't using for clothing, I would buy the family tea. That's our dinner for the evenings. And then I became really the carer for my dad and my brother Norman. And I was 12, 13, 14.
Wow.
And but what I did discover in my first year of secondary school is I won the English prize. I was top of
Wow.
maths, I was top of English, I was top of history, and I was top of art in that first year.
Wow.
So to come from a difficult background, to
Wow.
be told that I was thick, to be told I would
Mm.
never amount to anything. When I went to secondary school, my mother actually said in one of her more lucid moments, "That isn't you. What's happened to you? You're actually quite bright." And that was the first
Wow.
time that she'd ever said that. And that kind of taught me that actually sometimes children, and I still think this today, are misdiagnosed,
Mm.
misunderstood, come from backgrounds that if they were mentored, if they were helped, if they had one-to-one
Yeah.
support, they could shine, they could blossom. And
Mm.
I blossomed at 12. But that was my schooling. I wanted to go to university to do architecture. I didn't do that because I
Wow.
needed three B's and a C, and I got two B's and a C. So I became temporarily the manager of the supermarket that I started, and I managed that store for 6 months. And then I got a phone call that the application I'd made to join the civil service had been approved,
Wow.
and could I start? So I did, and I became a low level civil servant. And then they asked me if I would consider interviewing for a job in London.
Mm.
And I said, yes, London sounds magical. And I passed the interview and I ended up in the February of 1979 working for Hugh Brown, who was the Minister for Home Affairs for
Wow.
the Scottish office. And my office was Whitehall and the House of Commons. And my job was to basically do the filing, make the tea, and meet and greet diplomats and members of parliament who were coming to see the minister. And in May of that year, Margaret Thatcher and the Conservatives won the election. So ended up working for Malcolm Rifkind, who went on eventually to
Wow.
be Foreign Secretary and Secretary for Defence. And at the end of my contract, I had to go back to Edinburgh, and I ended up working for the Historic Buildings uh, Division. And I was responsible for helping the conservation officers look after the historic buildings throughout Scotland. And I loved the job.
Mm.
I missed London, but I, even more importantly, missed my new partner. And we'd got together in London in the final 6 months of my time in London. And then I had to go back. So, in the end, to be near each other, my partner moved to Liverpool. And in fact, for my very first visit, I fell in love with Liverpool. I love the city. I love the people. I love its honesty, its humor, its grittiness, its hard work, and its environment. Within a year and a half, we decided I would move to this place to live and to attend either polytechnic or university. And we decided my partner was in IT. I said, what should I do? And the answer was computing. That's going to be the next big thing. So this is 1983. It was about to be the next big thing. So I studied computing at Liverpool Polytechnic and I loved it.
Wow.
And when I finished at the Polytechnic, I set up my first computer company. And sadly, I had to close it 6 months later because I'd written a wonderful system for golf clubs to administer the membership systems,
Mm.
to calculate golf handicap pars, Stableford pars for women and for men. And it was the first in the world. And it was selling. And it wasn't cheap, but it included a computer because you needed a computer to run my software. And the company who created the computer, I fell out with them because they made their computers obsolete. I couldn't get any
Ah.
more. So there was, I put all my first business lesson, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I did that in those days back in 1985. And that company, you might have heard of it, it's called Apple. And
Wow.
the computer was the Apple IIe. So I couldn't rewrite the software. I went up to meet Stephen's boss. It was a family party in Formby, and I
Mm.
got speaking to one of the neighbours. And one of the neighbours was one of my lecturers back at the Polytechnic. I didn't
No.
know that. I
Mm.
didn't know he lived next door to Stephen's boss. And we got chatting, and I discovered that he was no longer working directly for the Polytechnic, but he was now working for a reasonably new thing called the Merseyside Innovation Centre,
Ah.
which was a partnership between John Moores, or sorry,
Mm.
then Liverpool Polytechnic, the University of Liverpool, and Liverpool City Council. And he was the managing director of their IT arm, the Innovation Centre's computing services company.
Brilliant.
So could I come and join him? What would I do? You could teach. I've never taught in my life. And then for the next 2 years, I was the trainer, then the training manager, and then the senior consultant for the Innovation Center in that computing services company. And I discovered I can teach, and I loved teaching. And I must have taught about 2,000 individuals in that period. And I was teaching SuperCalc, WordPerfect, and other applications, including Sage. You may have heard of Sage
Yeah, yeah,
Accounts.
yeah.
So I was one of the first people to teach Sage. I was also one of the first people to implement Sage in the Merseyside, now city region.
Mm.
And I grew to love IT. I also, during my time at the Polytechnic, became a programmer, obviously, because I wrote the
Mm.
golf club administration system. Then I moved into doing some programming. So I started coding. And then I got headhunted by Apple, the company that made the machine
Wow.
obsolete. And would I be their business development manager in Liverpool. And I agreed.
Wow.
In just 7 weeks, I ended up selling over 500,000 computers to local universities, including
Wow.
Leeds University. And in those days, that was outstanding. I mean, uh,
Gosh.
they couldn't understand how somebody could sell that many so quickly. But that's because I had a technical background.
Wow.
And also, I'm a huge believer in the sales world, in ethics, in integrity, and in honesty. And in fact, one of the sales, it was Leeds University, it was the chemistry department. And I'm sitting in front of the dean of chemistry. And he said, I want to get this machine and I want to get that machine. And it was a printer and a computer. And I told him, yes, for the printer, but I wouldn't buy the computer. Why not? And I said, well, it's very powerful, but you'll end up only using 5% of its capacity, its capability. If I was you, I'd buy this one and it will do much more for you. It will do exactly what you want with no wastage. And he said, well, that's very honest of you. And I went back to the office in Liverpool and the managing director said to me, well, how many? And it was meant to be only one. And I said, none, because I told him he shouldn't buy it. You
Wow.
can't do that. That's ridiculous. Oh, no, 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 no. And I said, I couldn't lie. I had to be honest. And so he wasn't happy at all. The next day, I'm with a client and they phoned the client and asked me to ring back. So I ring back. What's the problem? Thinking, am I sacked? Have they got rid of me? And he said, I don't know how you did it, but he's actually bought 100,000 of these. I said, that is amazing. That is absolutely, I want you to
Oh, my life.
teach my staff how we do this. So I did become a little bit of a trainer in there as well. But then a few weeks later, strangely, a dean of chemistry again, but at the University of Liverpool. Same question: should I buy this? My answer: no. Go for this instead. He bought £400,000 of those computers. However, he bought them, but I had resigned because I didn't like the ethics of pushing computers without actually finding out first what they were going to be used for and actually listening to what the client needs. So I had left and gone back to the innovation center, and I'll quickly move on. About 6 months later, I was headhunted by a group of companies, and I became marketing manager and then marketing director of those companies. And then I bought with my partner one of those companies. And 3 years later, we sold that company, being the third largest in Europe, of a range of building products that I actually had created. I taught myself AutoCAD because I couldn't afford to pay somebody to do it. So I taught myself AutoCAD to create 3D visualizations of things called stair edgings, those safety features that go on the edges of steps. But I sold that company just before the construction crash in the early 90s. And I opened up my second computer company, which I still have today, but we don't really do much in computing anymore. And we became the first in Merseyside to produce browser led applications, that is, ones that worked over the internet, and became very successful. And I became very good at, I was very good at coding, but I became even better in matching clients' needs by specifying, listening to the client, working at what they want, and then somehow magically turning it into a computer program that
Wow.
works in the office and over the web. And I sold off the coding programming arm of that business in 2004 because I had a quite a serious health problem then, and I was going to have to take a year out. And one of my clients bought the business and took the staff, took most of the staff, not all the staff, but took most of the staff. Others went on to other brilliant jobs,
Wow.
and we still keep in touch today. And their technology that I designed, that I technically authored and taught and designed to begin with, ended up having about 10 individuals programming, coding uh, on their site to manage about £3 billion worth of business using my software. And my software was being used in Australia, in America, in the Far East, and in the UK. And we were competing and winning against some major companies. It was really successful, but I sold it off. And then after about 6 months, not a year that I was taking out, but after 6 months, I was so bored. I hate not doing anything. So to fill the gap, I spoke to a friend and he said, "You should apply. I've heard there's two government contracts. One is sales and marketing, and the other one is economic growth, enterprise development." Anyway, I applied and I won both. And I did that until 2008. And that was business diagnostics, business
Oh,
planning, marketing campaigns, branding campaigns. I
oh,
remember I was marketing manager and director and very successful at it in previous companies. And I did take a failing company, which Steve and I bought, and turned into the third largest in Europe of what it did. That was the stair
gosh.
edgings. So I was successful at it. And I was then successfully bringing my experience through almost a mentoring process
Mm,
to all of these businesses that I was being paid to help. And then somebody came to me in 2007 and said, "We would like you to stand for election." So I then became you can't assume you're going to win, but
mm,
I did become a councillor for the wonderful area of Liverpool called Old Swan.
mm,
And I was a councillor there for the next 13 years, but I retired from politics in 2021. And I'm not involved in local politics anymore and haven't been for 3 years. But again, I have come back to kind of out of semi retirement to help the ADHD Foundation and also a care leaver charity called the Cornerstones Foundation. And I'm currently funding the expenses and tuition fees of some students that are attending John Moores University,
wow.
my university, as an
Mm,
alumni. I am now an honorary fellow of
mm,
John Moores University. I have been since 2016. I was Lord Mayor of the city. It was a wonderful, wonderful 13 months. It was outstanding. It gave me the capabilities to basically be entrepreneurial, be cheeky, raise lots of money, and we raised over £400,000 for charities throughout Liverpool, all local charities. And that's kept me in touch with those charities, and I still help them today, particularly places like the Whitechapel Centre, helping homelessness, helping those with drug dependencies or recovering from alcohol dependencies, those with cancer-related issues, those vulnerable children with disabilities or not, because all I see in my head is my brother
oh,
and what we went through. And he died 2 years ago
mm,
and left me his estate, which was a substantial amount of money, a surprising amount of money, to be honest.
oh,
Much to my anger, it could have been even more and could have been used more
mm,
in charitable causes. But can you just picture for a second, and I'm not being controversial,
mm,
my brother was given a compensation as a young man because he's thalidomide,
mm,
not a great deal of money, but was given compensation and put that into property and put it into stocks and shares
wow.
and had it managed by professionals.
Wow.
And when he died, we had to give to the UK government £400,000 almost in inheritance tax.
Wow.
So you imagine state
Wow.
prescribed medication, state compensation, and then you give it back with profit, 59 years later,
Gosh.
or 50 years later in this case. Um, so therefore, quite a lot of money went to the government.
Mm,
I would have preferred, as I am doing now, so I'm using my brother's legacy to fund charitable causes that are close to my heart. And those are the ones like neurodiversity,
Yeah.
like children that are in care or young adults coming out of care. And like me, I wouldn't have gone to university if it hadn't been for my partner. And I wouldn't have been able to complete my studies if I hadn't worked hard with the support of others. So
Mm.
Liverpool kind of turned my life around, kind of saved my life. And that sounds a very
No,
strong
not
statement,
at all.
but it did. And I think when I came to Liverpool in 1983 at the age of 24, that's where I started to really live. That's where
Wow.
I was the most stable, where, meeting my partner was the first time anybody genuinely had declared love for me and given me a hug
God.
in most of my life. My
Wow.
mum never hugged me. My dad never hugged me. My dad would rather punch you or belt you with a belt. My dad is dead. He died just before my mother in
Mm.
2002. They were tortured souls, and 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 I kind of forgive them in a way, but it's not my right to forgive them
Mm.
because they went through hell
Mm.
to be who they were, and that caused them masses of issues, but also caused trauma from my brother Norman, from myself, and my brother Leslie, the youngest, the one that died 2 years ago. So
Mm.
Norman still suffers, the middle brother still suffers massively and can't talk about it. I can because I found a kind of second life. The second life was coming to Liverpool, to going to university, to
Wow.
studying, to qualifying, to graduating, to going into business, to closing a business, to go into employment, to then sell and then go into business again. So I'm a bit of a serial entrepreneur. That doesn't mean to say I'm a wealthy entrepreneur, but I'm not motivated by money,
Yes.
motivated by people and what we can do to help each other. So currently, my brother's legacy and his investments are being used to support others, not to support me. We've been successful in IT. Both Stephen, who's now my husband, and I have been successful in our careers. That
Mm.
actually it isn't about other people's money, shoring up our
Mm.
finances. We should be using our money and my brother's money to help others because we're only on this world for a short period of time.
Mm.
And now that I'm getting on a bit, I'm not old, but getting on, I know on average what kind of lifespan I have left,
Yes.
knowing that when my mum died and when my dad died and when my grannies died and granddads died, and some of those went on to be 80 plus.
Mm.
And my auntie Ina, my dad's oldest sister, died just last year in September, and she died at the age of 90.
Wow.
So I hopefully have got a few years left,
Mm.
but my father died at the age of 65, and
Wow.
my mother died at the age of 68.
Wow.
But they drank, and mother took Mogadon, Valium, and whatever the replacements were. So
Mm.
she had issues internally because of that. So I don't drink, I don't smoke, and I'm not on prescription drugs.
Wow.
So I don't think health wise I've got the same issues as they had. And my mother died of an aortic aneurysm, um, which was basically in the stomach area. Well, I had an aortic, I sounded like erotic there, aortic aneurysm
Mm.
uh, examination through a CT ultrasound scan just 2 weeks ago. And it's healthy, it's perfect. So there's
Wow.
not even an issue there
Mm.
because you do worry, is it hereditary and those kind of
Mm.
things.
Mm.
But in the time that I've got left, I want to do more, to do better, but I also want to have more holidays. I want to enjoy myself. I want a life, work balance. So the work that I'm doing with the ADHD Foundation is funding a project. The work that I'm doing with the Cornerstones Foundation is as trustee, and I'm funding a project. And the work with John Moores University is funding students alongside the likes of Yoko Ono. So Yoko Ono doesn't know that I'm doing it. I know that she's doing it, is funding students at John Moores University in
Brilliant.
terms of attending university, particularly those from a care experience. background. So that is my future, is the charitable side of what we can do. And also one area I've not discussed, my time as Lord Mayor, my time as Assistant Mayor, and my time as Deputy Mayor of Liverpool, of the city government, taught me a lot about international relations and diplomacy. And I'm actually currently conducting a number of different campaigns that actually highlight what's great about the city for our business to business market, for
Mm,
our university to university and university to business market. So I am recognized as being a champion and somebody who understands intuitively now diplomatic relations and international relations in how we increase jobs and increase business, not about buildings, not about construction,
no.
but about trade, sport, health, education, business, and culture. And that's another area where I'm working with the Commonwealth Association as its president and the China Partnership as its chair and president. And I'm also helping protect the history, the heritage, the preservation, and the education of St. George's Hall Charitable Trust as its longest trustee. I've been a trustee since 2008, and we've raised hundreds of thousands of pounds to protect parts of that building. And
Wow.
I'm continuing to do that. And currently, we're raising money for the Minton floor tiles, for the organ, and also for a new statue, the first black statue of a woman in a city hall in Liverpool. And
Wow.
that's going to be Mary Seacole, who was a doctress, a nurse in the Crimean War. Who came from Jamaica. Her father was Scottish, her mother was Jamaican, and she went to Crimea to save lives, and she did. And we're going to build a statue to her and put it into St. George's Hall. There
Wow.
will be other women, and there will be other black women too, or women of color going into the hall. But the next one is going to be Mary Seacole. So that's something else that keeps me busy. And that was another two meetings I had yesterday. Um, and I wrote yesterday an article about the detective work I did in finding and saving two historic war memorials, one that had been stolen and one had just gone missing and was found underneath the soil in somebody's garden, and
Wow.
nobody knew where it came from. Well, I found out where it came from with a team of historians, and I was writing about that yesterday. And then my next final thing in terms of where I'm going to be is I've spoke about my childhood. I've implied about the childhood trauma I've gone through and about how life changed, and out of despair, some hope came. And that has been included in a 400-page book that I have finished. I am slightly editing it at the moment, but I have finished a book about the five members of my family, five key chapters about my brother Leslie, my
Mm,
mother Madge, my father Gordon, my middle brother Norman, and me. And it isn't all depressive. Some of it is. It is very emotional. And that will come out hopefully in May of this year. And its current title is Silent Victims. But it's a story not about me, but it's a story the first time it's ever been told of the impact of the thalidomide drug on the wider family.
wow.
Books have been written about the impact on individuals, meaning thalidomide survivors, but not the extended family. And as I've been writing it, I've discovered other families have gone through very similar experiences, which are shocking for them, traumatic, and
Mm,
sometimes not being resolved. I've resolved mine, but that's because I've written about it
mm.
and I've gone through it. Still hard, it's still a hard read, but that comes out later this year.
So, Gary, what is it you've learned? Because there's so many beautiful things you've done in your life, and hugely challenging too. But what is it you've learned along the way?
Excuse me, I'm thinking out loud here.
Mm,
I've learned to see people for what they are,
Oh.
and that is inherently good. Even those who might appear to be difficult and troubled,
Mm.
there is a reason for that, and it's not always their fault.
Mm.
So I've become a better listener and a more intuitive listener. I'm not an expert,
Mm.
but body language, to be brought up with a brother who couldn't speak, who couldn't hear,
Wow.
and couldn't do sign language, you do learn
Wow.
some techniques and some
Mm.
skills that become intuitive to understanding through body language,
Mm.
through facial movements, through body movements. Not what they're thinking. That's a bit
Mm. Mm.
weird if that was the case.
Mm.
But you're more in tune with individuals. So I've learned to be more in tune with people, and I've learned to forgive more
Oh.
and to see good in all. And I've seen bad, but then I found out why. And a
Yes.
big thing is I don't listen to the criticism or complaints about people from others. They'll say, oh, don't talk to him,
Mm.
don't talk to
Mm.
her, they are no good. Well, they may not be for whatever reasons, but that's for me to walk in their shoes,
Mm.
to actually know them better.
Mm.
So I always make the effort to kind of explore relationships in that way. And what I've also learned is I may care massively for others. I don't actually self care enough about me.
Mm.
And I know that. So I've gone through a routine this year of having a better understanding of my health,
Wow.
my bloods, of my internals.
Mm.
And actually, that's a good thing to do because it's allowed me to change my diet, as an example, and change other aspects of my
Brilliant.
life that allows me to be healthier.
Mm.
Because if I'm healthier, then I'll be around for longer.
Mm.
So, and I'll be around for longer because I've got a husband, Stephen, who I love massively.
Mm.
He's a genius. He's so bright. He's so funny. He makes me
Oh.
smile every single day.
Oh.
He does dances for me to put a smile on my face. He
Oh.
tells the worst bad dad jokes ever, all
Brilliant.
grown, but he has an infectious laugh. So he laughs at every joke that he's told about 20 times, but we still laugh at that joke. And it's not
Mm.
because we're laughing at the joke, we're laughing at the reaction to the joke. So I've learned not to take myself as seriously as I used to. I was motivated by making money when I was younger, much younger, and discovered actually it doesn't always work. It's nice to have it. It's great to have it. You know, some people don't have any.
Mm.
Then, you know, so can we help them too in some way? We can't
Mm.
help everybody. And I've learned also to say no more as well.
Brilliant. So here's a good question for you because I know that there's lots of in the answer in this one. So what keeps you going when times get tough? And I know they have in your life.
I think it's my loved ones, my husband, Stephen, that smile, that joke,
Oh.
that hug. I think showing warmth, love, friendship, and genuine, authentic care and compassion is what keeps me going. It's when you kind of have faith in people where all around you there may be negativity,
Mm.
a lack of positivity, silence when it's not required. We all need people like my Stephen.
Mm.
We need our partners, our husbands, our wives, our children, our pets,
Hmm.
our grands and our granddads, mums and dads at some stage in our life. So when things get tough, I think it's find somebody who's going to put that smile back on your face, even when you don't want them to, because there are friends of mine that actually, when you want to be angry with them
Hmm.
for whatever they've said or done, and then they look at you in a certain way, or they smile, or they laugh, and you just cannot be angry. And I think life isn't about being angry. Life is about being that positive character. So when times are tough, it's turning to friends who genuinely listen and genuinely want to help. And sometimes that listening and that help could perhaps just be a hug. That's maybe all we need is a hug to get through life.
That's so lovely. That's really lovely. And if you could go back to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Believe that you can.
Oh,
Don't listen to others when they try to drag you down. That might be something to do with them rather than to do with you. So actually, I do believe if I had understood myself when I was 11, when I was 12, when I was 20, or even when I was 5,
mm,
if I could just believe that actually certain things don't matter and lots that you think are important are only important today,
mm,
but they're not important long term. And actually, what is important long term is that, again, it's coming back to loving somebody, being loved, being genuine, and have a smile on your face.
oh,
And actually, I've always smiled. Really, I've always smiled. Even when times were tough, I learned to smile because it's so easy to do that, to
mm,
smile.
mm,
And it kind of sets something through your body, the endorphins, etc., that kind of bring you out of something. So I think get rid of the baggage, be yourself, be your authentic self, and find people that you can really trust and adore because they'll be the ones that make that difference. They're the ones that will tell you, Gary, you're making a difference. Sid, you are making a difference, even when you might not think that you are. Getting back to my imposter syndrome, I often question, am I any good? And actually, do you know what? In my own way, for me, it's enough. The goodness that I've got is enough. It may not be the goodness that everybody wants, and it may not be the goodness that I want today.
mm.
But I know actually deep down, it gets you through the day, it gets you through the week, it gets you through the problems.
That's lovely. And what legacy would you like to leave behind?
A better world,
Oh,
genuinely, a better place, a place that we teach our young children before school, during school. I'm repeating myself
mm,
to believe in yourself,
yeah.
but actually also to kind of think that your legacy is the actions that you take.
Mm,
And if those are positive,
mm,
if those are welcoming, are thankful, are pleasing, then others will hopefully pay that forward. Pay it forward. It is my mantra. That's my legacy. Let's all pay it forward. Don't look for applause. Don't look for thanks. Actually, what you can do, use the energy to help not one, but perhaps two, perhaps three others with the expectation that they've been helped, that they're going to help one, two,
mm,
three others. And it's like a ripple effect, isn't it?
yeah.
So I want my legacy to be a ripple effect of paying it forward to help everyone.
That's so lovely. And what do you think it is that what do you think the magic is that Gary Miller brings? I mean, I know, well, I think I know, but what do you think it is?
Well, it's a difficult one, and I'm
Mm.
delaying slightly because I'm thinking here, what can I say that sounds articulate and intelligent? But actually, I mean, the magic that's all around us is, in my case, I really do passionately believe that when you walk into an office or a shop or a factory, doesn't matter whether it's the janitor, the receptionist, the manager director, the CEO, they're all equally important
Uh,
and they all deserve a hello, a welcome, a smile. You know, and that's genuinely the magic we can bring is to walk into that room and light it up with a smile and positivity that people actually genuinely believe. that you care about them.
Mm.
Pay attention to them, make them feel they're the only ones in the room,
Mm.
not deliberately, because they are. And actually, that's really important for me. So the
Mm.
magic is, I suppose, to put a smile on your face and say please and thank you. There's
Oh,
three things there.
that's really lovely. And I mean, we call this thing a fizzy pop moment when you get really excited about something. What's the things that give you fizzy pop moments in life?
I get excited by seeing friends and family that haven't seen each other for years, for what months, for weeks, for days. And when they greet each other, it's like they've never been apart.
Oh.
So that kind of bonding between friends and family, and that bonding that, and I'll give you an example. I was at an event, I was co hosting the Commonwealth Ball in Liverpool, and hundreds of people were there from all communities, from diaspora communities, from
Mm.
36 different nations
Wow.
of the Commonwealth living in Liverpool. And I looked around the room and the team effort that went into that to create that great event brought together lots of like-minded individuals. And my fizzy pop moment last night was seeing people of all cultures, of all faiths,
Oh.
genders, sexual orientation, hugging each other, being nice
Oh.
to each other. And that's a world in one city where it doesn't matter who you are. So my fizzy pop moment, I think, is to witness firsthand people genuinely putting out a hand of friendship to somebody from a different religion, a different ethnicity, a different faith, and so on. And I think that really does get me going because I think there's hope in this world when you see that happening in our communities.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so beautiful. That really is lovely. And if you were to use one word to describe yourself, what would it be?
Well, it's got to be Smiler.
Oh,
You may have not expected that.
no.
It is Smiler. Um, I, when I was very, very young, I stood in a butcher shop in Dalry Road in Edinburgh. I was, I must have been 11, I think. And I stood below the top of the counter. I was short, but I was only 11.
Hmm.
And I have my little fingers on the counter asking the butcher owner for a quarter pound of haslet. Now, haslet is a spicy meat,
Wow.
very cheap. And I was actually making my father's and my brother, middle brother Norman's tea or dinner that evening. And it was going to be spaghetti hoops and haslet.
Oh.
Very cheap, very easy for an 11-year-old to make for myself, my dad, my brother. And I'm asking for the meat. And this woman next to me, this older lady, said, "Oh, haven't you got a gorgeous smile?"
Oh.
And the butcher turned to her and said, "We call him Smiler.
Oh.
This is Gary." And she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm buying the tea for tonight's tea. I'm going to be cooking it." Of course, I wasn't cooking anything. I was heating a can of spaghetti hoops
Yeah.
and opening a little packet of meat. But she said, "Oh, that's so sweet. What's your mother doing?" "Oh, she's in hospital. So I'm doing the tea tonight." "Oh, that's wonderful." And she said, "Do you want to make yourself some extra money?" So she took pity on me.
Oh.
And I looked and thought, I wonder what she's talking about. And she turned to the butcher and she looked at me and she said, "Well, I need somebody to do my shopping twice a week because I run a business over the road. I sell what they call Silver Cross prams.
Wow.
And would you like to do my shopping? And I'll pay you." And of course, she was just taking pity on me.
Mm.
So I said yes. And I worked for her from the age of 11 to the age of about 16,
No way.
doing what we called in Scotland, doing her messages
Wow.
every week, twice a week.
Wow.
And she was very proud to tell me, "Now, Gary, who do you think did this job before you did this job?" And I said, "I've got no idea." Do you watch the movies? I said, I do. Do you watch spy movies? Yes. I love James Bond. I love Sean Connery. And she said, that's who did my shopping for me, my messages before you, many years before. But Sean Connery
No
was her
way.
message boy, was
No
her
way.
errands boy. And then it was Gary Miller. It was
Ah,
me. And I thought, wow, before I wanted to become an architect, and before I became a computing expert and a teacher, and before I became Lord Mayor, I thought because I was doing her shopping for her, maybe I was going to be in spy movies like Sean Connery, but it never happened.
wow.
I never became Sean Connery. I'm glad who I did become, however, and she did take pity on me, but she allowed me to buy my clothes, my own clothes, and buy my tea for Dad and my brother Norman. So actually, she kind of, in a way, saved my life. She
Wow.
was the kind of person that I thought, there are nice people in this world, people that you can trust. And she was absolute sweetheart. And she actually sold the best prams you could imagine. And she was
Mm.
incredibly successful at it. So thank you to her. And thank you to the butcher for making the introduction as well. You never know those sliding door moments where somebody you might meet at an event, a networking event, at a party, at a wedding, in the office might change and save your life. So please keep smiling. It makes all the difference.
Oh, Gary, it's so beautiful. Whoa. What a story to finish on. Gary Millar,
Thank you
thank
so
you
much.
so much. Wow. Do you know what? I have smiled throughout the last however many minutes and the session before. Just, I can't stop smiling. It's just so lovely.
Wonderful. Sid
Oh,
Madge, you're an absolute superstar. Thank you for what you are doing
oh,
and
pleasure.
best of luck with everything.
Oh, Gary, thank you.